Hi, my name's Pete Barilla, and there really weren't a lot of good stories to help me in my life situation growing up. I have a brother with Down syndrome, and when you think of disability stories, you think of the person with a disability overcoming something. Sometimes could be a little too glorified, like inspiration porn, or the parents in their experience, but you don't really hear anything about the sibling experience, and that's, in my opinion, just as important. It doesn't help that we also live in a society that tells untold stories. We like to show people our highlights, our social media highlights, but not the authenticity. We don't post about our embarrassments, our failures, and how we're not always the hero, right? But I'm not saying we should do this on social media, but even in real life, when we are authentic about the full story of ourselves, then people can relate more to that and heal. And we can also provide guidance for people in similar situations. Because stories really are GPS for us, and we all need a decent, good navigation to get through the craziness of our lives. But even in my earlier auditions, I didn't want to talk about my experience. I wanted to talk about my brother's. That's been common for me. When I did a fellowship last year at CU Anschutz, I'll tell you about the fellowship first. The whole goal of the fellowship is to make healthcare and life better for people with disabilities and their families and healthcare providers. And so basically, we're the Avengers for the disability community. There's top-notch doctors, physical therapists, social workers, occupational therapists. And I was the family fellow, so I brought the family or the sibling perspective to the fellowship. And for my year-long project, I even wanted to focus on my brother's accomplishments and what he's done instead of talking about my experience. And so I told them that, and they're like, you know what? We don't want to hear Ryan's story. We want to hear your story. And I was like, oh, crap. I guess. And I reluctantly did give in. And with the help of my incredible mentors and a lot of reflection and even researching siblings, I was able to craft it. So I'm going to share about what it was like to do that, share a little bit of my experience and what came out of me when I presented my story, the good and the bad, how that helped others feel less isolated. So the research shows that siblings can really struggle with negative attitudes that peers or strangers have towards their loved one with a disability. And they can also struggle with peers and friends who don't understand their experience. I can attest to that. It all started when I was in 7th grade on a bus ride home from school with my peers, and we were all of a sudden driving parallel to a handicap bus. And right as we were perfectly parallel, people were pointing at the other bus and saying, retards, look at those retards, oh my god. Oh. They were mocking and dehumanizing people that they didn't even know, and that hadn't even done anything to them. And I sat there, pissed off, confused, and all other emotions I can't even label to you. A half hour later, I walked home, and off my stop, I walked home, and another handicap bus pulled up in front of my house, and my brother with Down syndrome walked out, and I gave him a big hug. It's very close to him. We shared rooms up until I was 16, and I would do anything for him. Back to my fellowship, we were thinking more about my story and how to tailor that, and they asked me a lot of questions on getting to other deep parts of the story. that I had to think about, because I had a lot of the benefits that Ryan has done, and how he's helped my family, and his authenticity and vulnerability, how that's been a great model for us. But they wanted me to get at some of the other frustrations and whatnot that I've had with society and bitterness. And so I needed to journal about that. So I went into my office, and this suppressed memory came to mind. And it came back to a time where I was smoking a lot of pot, and I was with a friend, and he brought his buddies. They had the weed, so I was like, yeah, you can come. So we ended up smoking a lot. And we came back to my house, and it was about midnight, and my brother Ryan came down stairs to give me a hug, because he hadn't gotten his hug from me, and we shared a room at the time. And so he gave me a hug, and I heard from the corner of the room, "Retard, look at, he's a retard." Guy kind of nudging his friend. And I heard it, but I didn't do anything about it, and I let him stay the night. So back to my office, as I'm thinking about all these things, I'm like, the Hulk just came out of me. I can't even tell you how pissed off I was. I literally started praying that man was dead. I was like, God, kill him. So I went on Facebook to see if he was dead, and found out he was still alive. And I was like, I'm going to send him some death threats and all these things that no one would expect me to do. So I realized I think I have some bitterness and anger issues to resolve. So I started taking deep breaths, and I took the light rail home from Aurora to the Lone Tree. It's a long ride. And I got thinking about forgiveness. And the idea of loving your enemies came to mind as a godsend. Jesus taught that, and Martin Luther King lived that out, and as a result, all of society benefits. African Americans and even those civil rights would trickle down to people with disabilities and the Americans with Disabilities Act. But I didn't forgive him yet. And so the following week I was with my mentors again, and they asked me, like, do you pity him? And I was like, why would I pity him? Why would I pity that man? Like, well, he's ignorant, and he doesn't have the relationship that you have. She was right. And I thought about it. And later on that light rail ride home, I actually decided to forgive him. And I decided to forgive the peers that I rode home in that bus. I decided to forgive society. But it didn't make sense to me why they would be so cruel to people that hadn't done anything to them. It's almost like this other memory came to mind, and a journal that I had about cosmic insecurity. And that's when we push down others that are more vulnerable, more different, or less powerful than us to feel better about ourselves, to make ourselves seem like more heroic or the heroes. And I realized I do the same thing, just in different ways. And that was humbling and confusing. I couldn't stand on my high horse anymore and judge society and make myself feel better than them. But when I had realized all that, it was like this weight was lifted. Anger and hatred. I actually forgave them, and I had clarity of how people are and why they do what they do, especially the vulnerable. And I'm not any better. I'm just as bad. So fast forward, I was reflecting on Ryan entering high school, and I was incredibly nervous at the time, him entering high school. He's so innocent. Would he be bullied? Would he be alone? Would he have friends? And he probably wouldn't go to prom or homecoming. But in Ryan's sophomore year of high school, one of his teachers talked to the head of student council and said, hey, we think it would be great for the school not just for Ryan, but for the school to have him in student council. And she agreed. And so Ryan was an active member of student council for 3 years, a man with Down syndrome. So he attended every school dance. And he went to the school dances with his girlfriend. He went to homecoming. He went to prom. And he was friends with the football captain, 250-pound, 6'4" man, all muscle, at his school. And they helped unify the school and bring the school together, having Ryan's good nature and leadership, and others embracing him for who he was and who he is. And now he works at a cafe with his girlfriend. So I'd shared all this to my fellowship, my whole story, the good, or the bad and the good. And two ladies in there that have brothers and sisters with disabilities came up to me and said, "You had spoken to me in ways that no one ever has. You have labeled emotions that I have been feeling. I thought I was isolated, but I know that I'm not alone and that there are other siblings out there that have experienced what I've experienced. So thank you, for giving me the insight on emotional challenges, but the hope that I have also for my siblings and myself." So we can do way more with our stories when we wisely share our authentic parts, our full stories with others, not just the social media highlights and even in conversations. So when we overcome the discomfort with authenticity, we can make the world less isolating and provide clarity and better GPS for others with our stories.